Keir Starmer's conference speech, wanting to acknowledge people's concerns on immigration. I'm again, only speaking for myself, I found those comments quite personally hurtful because I felt that it didn't acknowledge the reality of what had happened in the summer and what's really been happening over the last decade and a half in this country, which is immigrants and immigrant communities being blamed for the slow collapse of the British state, which immigrants and immigrant communities are not responsible for.
And it's interesting you say that because I read the speech in quite a different way, and which was that I think Labour could have been less bold in terms of talking about the riots, the fact that they were basically, violent far-right thugs who were breaking the law, and defending the fact that, we're not going to listen to your concerns about immigration when you're marching on a refugee hotel, for example. And actually, one thing I had heard Morgan McSweeney said behind the scenes is that whatever they say about any of this, they have this idea that they're never going to punch down on asylum seekers. They're never going to punch down on immigrants and benefit recipients. And so, for example, they always talk about smashing the gangs when it comes to the boats. They don't talk about the asylum seekers. That said, there are people in the asylum sector who do feel to me that there's a bit of triangulation going on. And even they find the language around just calling people illegal migrants, for example, rather than asylum seekers, a problem. That said, I was with someone pretty senior in that sector yesterday who, liked the fact that in the same speech you're talking about, Keir Starmer called people refugees rather than illegal migrants, which we didn't hear the language of refugees and asylum seekers as much previously.
But if you break that connection between the kind of demonisation in large sections of the conservative press in this country and what happened, and you portray the rioters to be this kind of, what they are, which is a group of far-right thugs, but a group of far-right thugs that has been encouraged and legitimised by the political language and the talk about immigrants and immigrant numbers and the need to drive down immigrant numbers. If you break that connection, it's a false analysis, isn't it, of what happened in the summer? If you don't acknowledge that there has been some mainstreaming of that political opinion, that kind of fringe far-right theory.
I mean, I think they understand that some of the things that people were talking about on the street are things that have been legitimised and talked about more broadly. The question is, how do you deal with it? Because there is this kind of really knotty situation, and I feel like I've been covering this for like 20 years, of both really legitimate concerns and racism. And how do you untangle that and get to, the answer? Like, it is legitimate that people are worried about the fact that net migration hit 745,000 and that has put, pressure on public services. I mean, I went to 6 parts of the country before the Brexit vote and talked to people about immigration. And there were places where there were hardly any immigrants and people were worried about immigration. But there were also places like in Peterborough where the community did look and feel really different. And it had happened at speed. And some of the people were saying, well, this has just kind of blown our minds and we're kind of not ready for this speed of change. And the local GP was saying, look, I can't deny that this has put pressure on us. So I suppose it's like, how do you disentangle all these different arguments?
Just spend money on it. Spend money on the public services. Spend money on integration, assistance programs, like create community. Yeah. Spend money on it. I just feel like we just always have this, it's so tricky, so tricky. Is it? Just spend money on it.
Yeah, but where'd you get the money from? So in one of those places I was talking about in 2016, I was in Lee in Greater Manchester, and there were like 3 people screaming at me about immigration whilst we were making this film. And
that sounds
interestingly, it was stressful. And interestingly, one of them was black, one of them was Polish. I mean, it was quite an eye-opening moment for me. But there was this, young black mum who was basically shouting about immigrants. But when I talked to her about it, what I realised was her daughter didn't have a school place. And that was the problem. Yeah. And if you fixed the problem, then maybe she wouldn't be so worried about immigration, which I have to say, I do think the 2010 example in Barking and Dagenham was about that. Yeah. They were like, if you fix the eyesore gardens, then people will stop blaming the Africans. And so you can deal with the myths. Now, whether or not they carry that now into a national government, it's hard to know and hard to see, and the problems are vast. And like I say, where do you get the money from? I mean, it's a difficult time.
Of course. I think the word you used, myths, there was really good. It was a really good word, because I think as well, I'm saying spend money on it, but that almost in a way, when I say that, it sort of enforces our idea that because there's whatever pressures on GPs, it's all because of immigrants. And that's not quite true, is it?
No, of course not. I mean, there's huge arguments in all directions when it comes to immigration. The reality is that lots of immigrants are working people who pay tax as well as, using things from the state. But it also is the case that people are worried about levels of immigration, and they can be worried about it without being racist. And I think it's just disentangling that and then working out what the policy response to it is.